Hello, everyone. My name is Monica Kretschmer, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Universal Women's Network and Women of Inspiration Awards. And this is our virtual series where we're speaking to leaders across Canada and beyond. And today it is a really exciting topic. We are talking to the leaders in cybersecurity. Now, not just the leaders, we're talking to industry experts and women in cybersecurity as well. We have a support here in the room. So I'll do a little bit of an introduction to all of our panelists here, and then we will dive in. So once again, if you do have a question, we'll hold the questions off to the very end, and then I would love to be able to answer those in the green room for you today. So welcome, everybody. I know that you're calling in from across Canada, from Toronto to Vancouver, and of course, I'm located here in Calgary. Welcome, everyone. Okay, I guess the panelists, we can turn your microphones on. I said ground rules, make sure everybody's microphones off and videos are off, but panelists will keep yours on. So I'm going to do a couple introductions so that we can put some faces to the names. Of course, we've been launching this off in social media, but now you're in live here. So I'm going to first introduce Sharon Bauer. Sharon is the founder and CEO of Bamboo Data Consultant. Sharon is the founder of Bamboo Data Consultant. She is a privacy consultant and lawyer, making her unique experience in this market. She advises on international privacy regulations and I can't even say that word. Sharon. Operationalizes practical privacy programs for her clients. She also acts as a virtual chief privacy officer, which is really important, especially now that everything has gone virtual. So welcome, Sharon. It's so great to have you. Next, I will introduce Kimberley St. Pierre, Director of Strategic Accounts for Tanium. And you've got that wonderful logo behind you. Vice President of ISACA Vancouver. So I'll get you to talk a little bit about that. Kimberley has worked in the IT and business development program for 20 years. She has worked for Canadian technology giants such as TELUS and Bell, and also experienced working for the world's largest cybersecurity companies. In her current role as Vice President of ISACA Vancouver, she is also a member of the Government of BC's Provincial Security Advisory Council. You've been a very busy lady. I know we've had some meetings and you're off putting out fires, so thank you for joining us, Kimberley.
Thanks for having me, Monica.
You are so welcome. Next, I'd love to introduce you to Venetia Verdicchio. Did I say that correctly?
Visha Verdicchio.
Thank you. Thank you. And you are the Director of IT for Rival Technologies. Super excited to have you here. You are the Market Research Industry Director and Securities Professional. And your current role is the Director. You lead the security, compliance, privacy efforts for Rival Technology Insight platform. So super interesting. Of course, every single one of our experts has a really diverse area of expertise. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you.
Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. And lastly is Dominic Vogel. Dominic is the founder and chief strategist for Cyber SC. Dominic is actually the reason that this whole panel is being put together today. So I have to say thank you, Dominic, for actually coordinating and introducing me to these powerhouse female women across Canada in cybersecurity. Now, Dominic, you and I have had a couple opportunities to have a podcast where we talked one-on-one. You are the chief strategist and founder at Cyber SC. Dominic holds a proven track record within the cybersecurity across a multitude of industries and actively participates in Vancouver's security community and you are highly regarded as a thought leader in this area. So Dominic, we really so happy that you are actually leading by example and championing for women, not just in cybersecurity, but in all areas. So thank you for enabling this panel actually to come together so effortlessly and inviting these women and for this to happen. So thank you and welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Monica. This is going to be a fun hour.
It is going to be a great hour. So that was the quick, short bios for everyone. Of course, the long bios are going to be on the website. So I really encourage everybody to dive in, get to know each and every one of our panelists today, because they're extraordinary women. They've got a lot of experience behind them, and not just in cybersecurity. So this is where I want to start with is, how on earth did you make it to cybersecurity? Why did you choose this? And where did you pivot from? Let's start with you, Sharon.
Yeah, so thanks again for having me. I started my career in law, and I was an insurance litigator. I became a partner 5 years after I got called to the bar, and eventually had my own practice. And it was a thriving practice, and on paper, everything was perfect. But there was something in me that I just felt like I just wasn't fully satisfied. And maybe I lost that passion for what I was doing. And very organically, I fell in love with privacy and security. And I realized it was a very relevant topic in today's day and age. And I immediately recognized the paradox between wanting the convenience of the technology that we're using, but also not willing to give up my privacy. And also recognizing that there's this negative social impact that can be caused by giving up your privacy. But being an entrepreneur then as a lawyer, I realized that you can't just take away data and not enable a business. So for me, it was really a passion about trying to find that right balance of enabling a business by using the data, but then also protecting an individual's privacy. I've always wanted to make a positive social impact. And so that was kind of my way. And so I decided to pivot my career from my legal practice. I sold that and I started a brand new career, realizing that I was starting right at the bottom. Which was a very difficult thing for me to do, especially because I had 2 young children and I was the breadwinner. And so I had to give that all up in the security. And I just felt that my passion was going to kind of lead me through that journey. I was lucky that although I was starting at the bottom, I had some skills, those soft skills that I built that were transferable. And I was able to navigate this new industry much faster than I had when I was at in law and starting, as a student. The last thing I want to say is, we're often brought up thinking that we must choose one career and stay with that career. And I always felt that that was going to be my destiny. And I felt so guilty leaving this perfect legal job and starting something new. I thought that I was going to disappoint my parents and, not provide for my children. And, I'm never going to succeed again. But I also had to trust my journey. And no road is perfectly straight. Sometimes it veers, sometimes it pivots, sometimes it makes a U-turn. And I knew if I wasn't going to succeed in privacy and security, perhaps my road will make a U-turn. So far, it has not done that. And I'm so glad I followed my passion and encourage everyone to do the same if it's right for you.
Amazing. And I'm so glad that you touched on that piece because, pivoting is much about the journey. You have to trust your instincts, and especially right now where, and I'd like to really talk about where we are right now. We're May 13th. So we're really literally March 11th, the world turned upside down overnight, literally. And there's been a lot of pivoting going on. There's been a lot of innovation. There's been a lot of opportunities. So thank you for sharing that, because I think it's really important for people to keep that in the back of their mind as they sort of navigate to the new normal, and where that is, that there's opportunities that surround us. So all of our knowledge is transferable. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Sharon. And also, we'll get to the point where your expertise is in the area of privacy and data. So we'll talk about the difference between cybersecurity and privacy. So thank you so much for that amazing intro. So next, I'd like to interview Kimberley. We'd like to talk about, where you were. I mean, you have over 20 years of experience in this area. Now, have you always been in cybersecurity, or did you navigate through that area? So tell us a little bit about your journey up until this point.
Sure.
So I was with TELUS for 13 years, and that's when I moved into cybersecurity. I was an account manager, and I was looking for a change and something different. And I didn't know if that was going to be with inside TELUS or somewhere else. And I'd worked a fair bit with our cybersecurity team on different opportunities with different clients. And I was looking for something where I could learn, and that seemed to be the most appealing. Of course, I had the option to look going on other teams, contact center, data center, what have you, but the security seemed to be the most appealing to me. My career has taken a wildly different direction. It's really taken off since I've come into cybersecurity, and I credit that a lot to my professional network that I have, a lot of the work that I've done with ISACA. And the role that I'm in now, I've been in sales for a very long time, and that's currently what I'm doing with Tanium. But I've been recruited 3 times since I've been in cybersecurity for more challenging career opportunities. But it's very important that I've left all of my employers on very good terms, and those teams are still really valuable, important parts of my professional network. So it's not like I was deliberately trying to hop around from role to role, but there was new opportunities that were presented to me, and it made sense for me. And I have to thank a lot of my professional network for all of the time that they've spent coaching me and giving me advice and guidance into, kind of where to look in the cybersecurity realm. And a lot of that network comes from ISACA. So you mentioned earlier, Monica, that I'm on the board of ISACA Vancouver. So ISACA is a global nonprofit organization where it's really about providing education, certifications, professional tools, and resource sharing, a lot of advocacy and networking opportunities. A massive international organization. We've got over 140,000 members. We're operating in 200 chapters in 180 countries. So when you think of the power behind a professional network, it expands far beyond the Vancouver realm. So that's my journey and how I came to cybersecurity. And I'm so thankful that I found this career phase.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think so that your journey has been pivoting within the industry, which is really important. And I look at sort of the importance of building those, that human capital and those relationships, because those relationships enable you to be that trusted source when they see your name come up and you've got another project that you're interested in. There's also room for collaboration. Absolutely. And for strategic partnerships to come out of that. So I think that that's brilliant. I think that's really great advice to share about, when you're pivoting or moving in those directions, is to make sure that those relationships that you've established are built solid so that you can look forward to strategic partnerships or collaboration opportunities. So thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Welcome. And Venetia, welcome. I'd love you to share about your journey to where you are right now with Rival Technologies.
Absolutely. So I graduated and jumped into the technology world right away. I have a bachelor's of sociology, and I definitely wasn't working in a CTO organization at the time. I was actually working as like a project manager. And so I was with that company for about 7 months when they go, Venetia, you keep telling us what to do. This was some of my mentors and people who worked in the technology division. We have this opening for a compliance analyst, and you're just annoying enough that you're going to be great at this role. So compliance in the security and IT world is kind of the person who taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, you were supposed to do that access audit. Have you done it yet? And so from there, with my 4 years at that company, I grew with the company. I went from being a compliance analyst to managing their compliance portfolio, PCI, SOC 2, ISO 27001, to managing the entire information security team, including the more technical side, vulnerability management and running penetration tests. And that company was a phenomenal company for many, many reasons, but we recently sold that company to PayPal. So after that happened, I got a tap from a recruiter and pivoted into the market research space, where I have a very similar role at Rival in the Reed Campbell Group, running their security and IT program from the end to end. I was really excited to join this panel because it's an intersection of not just cybersecurity, but the power and importance of having men who understand and want to participate with the revolution that we're seeing in our industry. So when I talk about those mentors and sponsors that tapped me on the shoulder back at that first company I was working at, 2 of them were men and 1 of them was a woman. And without them, I would not be where I am today, because they were really pushing me to say, hey, you know, get involved with ISACA Vancouver. And Kim's talked a lot about that. Go to those events, learn about the industry. So I think that there's a real value in that sponsorship. There's real value in mentorship. And it's definitely gotten me where I am today.
Thank you. Really, really great points that you covered. Number 1, I love that. You know what? I see a great fit for you. You're really on the ball. And I mean, that's great that you have people supporting you on your journey like that, and identifying that it's really men and women are such great allies. And we take our support system from our cheerleaders on all areas, and that support system, network, community, relationship is so, so important. So really interesting journey that you have, and so glad that you're able to contribute part of this panel today. I'm super excited. And now I'm going to save the last intro for Dominic. Dominic, you are the Support Her. And for those of you that don't know what Support Her, I started Support Her in 2018. I saw a need for elevating the male champions that are champions for women in their networks, communities, and workplaces. If you're champion for women at home, you don't necessarily change hats when you go to work or when you go out to the community. So I think it's really important to raise the profiles of men that do that. Dominic and you and I met on LinkedIn, and right away started a conversation, had an offline conversation, started a podcast, and you know, like 2 months later, we're actually now having this great panel, and literally you lead by example in everything that you do. So really excited about this conversation, about actually having you join us. But Dominic, how did you get, like, what was your path to cybersecurity? And we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but why are you so invested in women?
Absolutely. Well, first off, thank you for the kind intro. And Venetia gave me a great idea for a bumper sticker about just annoying enough. So I'm going to order a bunch of those. So, but in terms of how I got into cybersecurity, I was very fortunate that right out of university and going into university, where I got a bachelor's of science in computer science, that I knew I wanted to work in cybersecurity. It was still a very nascent field at the time. So I started off as a security administrator, and one of the first things I noticed when I entered the field was that it was an industry ruled by pissed off middle-aged white guys, of which I'm slowly becoming one of those. But what's has been interesting over time has been seeing greater revolutions, and I think this panel is an awesome example of the fact that there are incredible leaders. I don't just see them as females; I see them as leaders in cybersecurity and in privacy. And that fills me with great hope, and I think there's still a lot of growth that still needs to happen, but it's platforms like this where we can keep instilling positive change. But in terms of sort of my career trajectory, where the pivot in my career was that I always thought I was a heads down person, very introverted, just wanted to sort of quietly work my way up the corporate ladder and just stay in corporate. I worked in the credit union system for many, many years, and one day I realized how much I hated corporate life and how I could no longer tolerate endless meetings from 7 to 5 every day. And then I went on this journey the past 5.5 years of what I referred to as my journey of self-discovery, in which I figured out, I identified that I was an entrepreneur, that I actually very extroverted. I love speaking out in public. I love championing causes. These were all things which I didn't know were inside me. So this journey has been very fulfilling in that regard, to be able to find out my true purpose and who my true self is.
Amazing. So thank you, Dominic. You're going to add such a great perspective to the conversations that we're going to have. And just to let our listeners and our viewers know how we're going to go about it. This is like a wide open topic. I mean, number one, I want to touch on the difference, first and foremost, between cybersecurity and privacy. So let's start there. So Sharon, you're in the area of privacy. So maybe I can get you to talk a little bit more about the difference there, and I'll get the rest of our panelists to sort of jump in and we can talk about that difference, where your expertise is and how they actually fit really well together.
Right. So security is really about protecting information from unauthorized access or from breaches. Privacy, on the other hand, is about having control over personal information and how it's being collected, used, and disclosed. And when I talk about privacy, most people say to me, oh, you know, as an individual, I'm not worried about my privacy because I don't have any secrets. And what I say to them is that privacy is not about secrecy, it's about having control over your information. So who gets to collect it, how they get to use it, and who they get to disclose it to. So from an organization perspective, you need to understand that, you know, having consent to take data from an individual is not a free-for-all. There are limitations and restrictions, as well as regulatory guidelines that tell you how you can use the data, when you can collect it, and who you can disclose it to. So privacy is really about how you're taking the data, how you manage it, who you disclose it to, and cybersecurity has to be a part of that, because if someone's going to entrust you with their data, they want to make sure that you're protecting it as well. And so that's how there's that collision between privacy and cybersecurity. It's about protecting the information.
Amazing. So thank you for sharing that, because I think that's really, it's like it dovetails together, right? And certainly the area that you practice in, I mean, what would you say, you know, it's not screaming out to us all, right? That there's like industries or you can specialize in this, but you know, when did it, I mean, where could people find more information, Sharon? Like where do you get started and really, really make sure, is there like a checklist that you can go to? What sort of tools and resources can people have to make sure that they are actually up to date?
So, I mean, when I first started and I knew nothing about privacy, I used LinkedIn as a great resource and started to connect with the experts in privacy on LinkedIn. And we're constantly trying to educate the public and organizations about their privacy obligations. Another great tool is to go to the Privacy Commissioner's website. They provide you with guidance, whether you're a small business, a startup, a medium or large enterprise. They will provide you with a checklist of what exactly you need. But you know, the best solution is probably to talk to a privacy expert who will really kind of dive deep into your organization specifically, because a checklist is not always going to be very custom to your situation. So reaching out to an expert will certainly give you a ton of insight into how you're using your information, whether you're allowed to use that information in that way.
And I know that after we after we complete our panel, I know that each and every one of our experts are going to be making sure that they leave their contact information. We can let you know how that you can get a hold of them so that you can reach out to each and every person, because I know that lots of questions will come up. So thank you for sharing that difference between that privacy and cybersecurity. Now, we're going to talk about cybersecurity. So let's talk about cybersecurity. Kimberley, you deal with primarily not the small, medium-sized businesses. You are like the large corporate companies. Cybersecurity, are there different levels between the size of organization from a small, medium to a large size business? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think quite often the risks are still the same, whether you're a small organization, mid-size or large, but I think the approach that you take and how you do that is going to be very different. If you're a small organization with limited expertise, and we all know there's a massive global talent shortage, you're potentially going to rely more heavily on professional services organizations rather than trying to tackle that some more so yourself. Where larger organizations typically are more mature, they also have a lot more staff and resources to deal with cybersecurity from a just general security posture standpoint to trying to take action and mitigate threats. but the environment in which they function, whether it is privacy, regulatory compliance, what have you, that really doesn't change. I really think it's more about their approach that they take. When you think of large organizations compared to small, a lot of our large organizations have board of directors that ultimately are going to own a lot of that cyber risk from an advisory standpoint. The executive team, obviously the CEO, and we see this in the news all the time when there's breaches that are happening every 3 or 4 days. The people that usually wear that are the ones who are impacted by a falling stock price or share value. That's usually the executive and quite often the board. So when you think of, what boards can do to help them prepare to better understand, I'm going to call it cyber speak or cyber lingo, they really need to start challenging themselves. And there's a lot of activity happening at the board level to do this, but there's still so much more that they can do to learn. One of my favorite things for that general learning right off the bat, especially if you're new on a board and you're not super experienced, and usually you'll have some cyber expert on the board, but that doesn't mean you want to leave it to that individual to own everything. Reading things like the Verizon data breach investigation report that comes out every year, and I think the 2020 report is due out in the next couple of months. Understanding what cyber frameworks are, understanding a little bit about the lingo. I'm a huge fan of skip level meetings, so I would encourage boards and senior leaders to actually have conversations with the business, with some of those individuals that are dealing with frontline threats. And the reason I'm a fan of skip level meetings, and this doesn't just apply to IT and cybersecurity, this applies to sales as well. Information from the top down and then the bottom up is often filtered, and you lose some of that essence. So I think the increased communication efforts need to be ramped up, and a better understanding of what some of those frontline team members are experiencing. And then the final thing from kind of a business risk perspective, whether you're small, medium, large, is there's a lot of mentoring going on, but usually that's more senior business expert or individual or professional that's being the mentor to a younger, more junior business professional. I think we need to flip that, especially when you think of technology and cyber risk. I couldn't think of something more exciting than a board member in their 60s or 70s being mentored by a 20-year-old person.
Interesting. So let me ask you something about sort of that interest there on the board levels. Are you finding that is a standing agenda item to talk about the risks? I mean, was that on the agenda before COVID, or is it becoming now something really important now that COVID has actually surfaced? So has that changed since the Great Pause?
It's changed. I would say that it's always been a topic. And when if you look at the World Economic Forum and where they rank cybersecurity in relation to other global risks, it's up there, as is a disease, a pandemic. I think what COVID or the Great Pause has brought light to is how ready organizations were to respond to something like this. There's a lot of organizations that were able to mobilize massive workforces very easily. And I think talking to them, they actually surprised themselves that, wow, man, did we ever do this well? And there's other organizations where it really exposed vulnerabilities in their environment. I'm not talking software vulnerabilities. I'm talking just vulnerabilities of their ability to address business continuity in an effective fashion in a very compressed time frame and expedited manner. When you think of what's changed, there's a lot more focus on gaps in organizations. So whether that's something like a visibility gap of just not even understanding where there are potential threats in their environment, resilience gap. So that could be vulnerabilities in their environment that they haven't addressed. Like you look at a lot of organizations and they just simply haven't patched a lot of old vulnerabilities, and patching's not easy. It's hard because you don't want to disrupt business, but it is absolutely critical. And then accountability gap. So when you think of who's responsible, whether that's the executive, the board, your IT operations team, your cybersecurity teams, there's a lot of finger pointing, and there's you can guarantee that when there's an issue that happens or a breach that happens, no one's standing up saying, oh, that was my fault, my bad. It doesn't happen. So it is absolutely becoming much more prevalent during COVID, but it's still always been there. And I suspect it's going to, from an importance standpoint, it's going to keep increasing.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Now, Venetia, how would you say that let's talk about the impact. Has that changed for your organization? Has the emphasis changed, or the structures that you've put into place, you know, are you now thankful for that structure and that compliance that you have within your organization? Do you see other organizations struggling in that area now? So maybe let's talk a little bit about that area of governance and compliance and how, you know, like this kind of snuck up on us. So, you know, let's talk a little bit about your knowledge in that area around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the company that I'm at today is about 2 years old, and we made a very conscious decision to do two things. One, put a cloud-first strategy in place, both in our application that we maintain and also in our corporate side. So our file servers and emails, we don't maintain data centers and gear. And all of our employees have laptops. So that was point number one. And then point number two that we really made very early on as a business was to incorporate security and compliance as soon as possible and actually use that as a core competency when we go to market. So rather than, and we sell to Fortune 500 businesses, very, very large names, household brands, you would know them if I started naming them, sort of thing. And they care about security because they don't want to end up on the news because they hired the 70-person startup out of Vancouver, British Columbia, and down the dominoes fall, right? So that was the first thing we did. We made it an organization-wide goal to get our SOC 2 Type 1 compliance done within the first 2 years of the company starting up. That was a great way for us to be able to go to those big Fortune 500 companies and say, hey, here's proof that we can play with you. We know exactly what you need to see us be doing. We have that patching program that Kimberley mentioned in place, and we started running it very early on so that we're not going to hit 200 people and then struggle to patch those endpoints. And that's been super important. And so for me, when I was looking at leaving a very large established organization, knowing that my CEO and my board of directors were heavily invested in security, heavily, a lot of interest in the organization to grow that program and not just at the surface level, was really interesting. So fast forward another year to when coronavirus hit, we were very well positioned to transition from working in an office to working remotely and working from home. Now, of course, we had some growing pains and we had to do a few changes on the back end to make sure that everybody was supported, and redundancy definitely came into play there, making sure that, what if Slack has an outage, which some of you might have noticed there was a Slack outage last night. Okay, well then we'll fail over to Microsoft Teams. Those are the kind of considerations that we made, but because we were a younger software company, we could pick up our laptops, walk home, plug them in, connect to the internet, and go right back to it. So we were very lucky to be on the opposite end of the spectrum, but I have many colleagues in industry who are, if you have a desktop that's chained to a desk in your office, what are you going to do? So I think this was really an exercise in learning what we were doing right and where we have a chance to improve upon.
Amazing. So I think that's really interesting, the thought process from a startup is actually knowing, okay, so these are the customers that we want to have in our wheelhouse. What do we need to do to actually win their relationship trust and get you there? So I think that, that's valuable information. So for those that are listening and thinking about their organizational goals and growth and partnerships, we're all in this together. We all want to make sure that we protect each other. So thank you for sharing that perspective. I think that's super valuable. Dominic, now your area of expertise is, when do people pick up the phone and call you? When something's already happened, or are they being proactive?
We focus exclusively on small and mid-sized organizations. So that's companies as small as maybe a dozen employees all the way up to maybe just under 1,000. So the full gamut there of the SMB spectrum. And it's funny, as a security practitioner, and I'm sure everyone on the panel here can relate to this, in which we do want to preach being proactive, but the truth of the matter is that for the most part, the market is still very reactive, and I would probably say 90% of our clients still come to us reactively. So that's either after a data breach, after a significant security incident, and they say, well, everything's burned to the ground. How do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? Venetia was I think alluding to this case here, in which particularly with a lot of our smaller clients, if they're trying to sell, if they're a B2B organization, they're trying to sell their platform, their services, what have you, to larger organizations, the whole supply chain risk and vendor risk management piece is being really locked down from enterprises and large organizations. They're no longer tolerating just really high-level basic checklists saying, do you have a cybersecurity program in place? And in fact, this has happened on more than one occasion in which we've had a prospect reach out to us saying that our biggest client, which makes up 3/4 of our revenue, they're asking for proof of our cybersecurity program. We've been lying on our security questionnaire for years. We actually have Jack all in place. We're scared of losing this contract. Please help us. Obviously when I hear that, I was like, well, here's the old price. I'm going to just rip that up. Here's the new price. But, it still speaks to the fact that it's still a very reactive market. And I'm very hopeful, though, that as time goes on, that there's more of a proactive approach to this, because as everyone on the panel can attest to, when you're more proactive about cybersecurity, that allows you to be resilient in the face of any unknown threats, as the case was with Venetia and her organization there, which they set up their organization in such a way they weren't predicting a pandemic, but the pandemic came out of nowhere and they were resilient in the face of that. So I think that's what more organizations need to strive for.
Amazing. So let's talk about those risks that have really come to the forefront. And these, were there risks that were identified before that have just kind of blown up, or new risks that have happened, since in the past 9 weeks? So let's maybe just jump in if you want to talk about those risks. I think that people would like to know them if they're not front and center on the news. What can we all be watching out for?
Sure, happy to start. So in light of COVID, a lot of companies are implementing new practices, which results in a new way of collecting information from their customers, new use cases in which they're using that data that they're collecting, as well as disclosing it to new parties as they're engaging with new vendors to help them through this process or to get them onto the cloud. However, a lot of companies are forgetting to update their policies and procedures, which means that there's misalignment between their practice and their notice to their customers, as well as their staff becomes misinformed because they don't understand what their responsibilities are in now collecting, using, and disclosing information. The other issue that I'm seeing is a lack of consent. So our privacy legislation, our federal privacy legislation, which is PIPEDA, is a consent-based legislation. So if you don't have consent to use data for a particular purpose, you can't use that data for that purpose. Now, a lot of companies have originally obtained their consent, but are what I call doing a purpose creep, which means they're taking that data for which they got consent for one purpose, but using it for now a different purpose, that they never got that consent to use it for that secondary purpose, which means they are now breaching, essentially, privacy of their users. So there's a ton of risk there that companies are not really paying attention to, and may create a brand new crisis for this for these organizations once the crisis is over. Another very small issue that I'm going to mention, I'm going to let the other panelists talk, is vendor risk management. As I mentioned before, a lot of organizations are engaging with new vendors or third parties. you can outsource the data to them, you can outsource the processes to them, but you cannot outsource your responsibility to your vendors. And you have a responsibility if you're collecting personal information. Without doing your due diligence, like Dom had mentioned before, where his clients are calling him, oh no, like we need to comply with all these security requirements. There are also privacy requirements that you must comply with. But not only you, but you must do that on the vendors that you're engaging with. So make sure that the vendor has proper privacy and security protocols, because if they're in breach, you are the one that's going to be on the hook. You are liable. You must notify your users of a breach and report it to the commissioner, not the third party.
I'd add on to that to say, you bring up a great point when we talk about the addition of new third parties in an organization to respond to some of the tools that we now need to work remotely. I think there's also a human element to cybersecurity, where I do my best work when I can walk through the office and connect with people and talk to them about the policies and procedures that we have and understand why they might have configured something that way, and really get in there and involve myself in conversations. That's really hard to do when we work remotely. And so shadow IT, the concept that you might not be the IT department, but you've gone out and procured a new piece of software, and maybe you didn't do that security review and you didn't make sure that they were in compliance with what they needed to be, can really get lost. And same thing when we're on and offboarding staff. So, a lot of organizations have had to say goodbye to some team members in order to stay, a going concern with their business. And so how do you offboard someone remotely? All of those questions kind of come up, and if you're not involved in that conversation as the security or IT person, the person who owns that risk, you can miss something. And in that missed conversation, there's a lot of unknown.
One of the things I'll add too, and particularly what we see with the smaller and mid-sized organizations, is that many of them weren't fully prepared to have their entire workforce work remotely. Whatever remote access they had in place, if at all, was only meant for a handful of users, and that was generally for the executives. And what we've seen is that there was a huge rush from a functionality perspective just to get people working remotely. They didn't really think about security, and as such, again, I'm trying to ballpark the percentage is a little bit of a tough chore, but I would say that there's a sizable majority of small and mid-sized businesses and organizations that have set up insecure or less than I guess less than optimal state of security for the remote access mechanisms. And now that there's at least a little bit of stability, I think this is an opportunity for those organizations to revisit what solutions they have deployed for remote access, and if they can be better secured, or if they should be looking for a more long-term solution rather than just relying on a short-term temporary fix.
Yeah, just to kind of add on to that, it's doing your housekeeping right now before you get back to the office and, business as usual, hopefully. You got to take care of all of those annoying things that no one wants to take care of, which is your privacy and security policies, right? Like, get that out of the way now. And then the last thing that I'm going to mention about risks, it's not related to COVID, although it's just this risk that always exists, is record retention. How many companies retain their records indefinitely or their data indefinitely? They cannot do that. And many companies are not aware of that and are afraid of disposing their data because they like to hoard it. They might need it one day. They could get in a lot of trouble for that. So make sure that you address what data you need, what data you don't, and that you're compliant with legislation. It's a big one.
So I'll add a comment just talking about the new risks that we're seeing with emerging because of COVID. I think the biggest is understanding you now have this massive remote workforce. So even if you secure your asset that your employee is taking home, what is that asset connecting to? So you have a laptop that's now connecting to your home network. Well, what else is on that network? So you've got devices that your family may play games on. You may have printers, what have you. And the risk of what type of network they're using, are there any vulnerabilities on the network? Is the network already penetrated and there's an actual threat happening? That's something new that I've certainly seen, and that was definitely not anticipated.
Well, isn't this the happy parade? I just have to say. There is so much information here that is valuable, that is timely, and that is super, super important. So I really thank all of you for being able to share all this really important stuff. I think this is probably the first of many panels that we actually do have to have, because I look at, you know, I'm sitting back absorbing all of it, and I could see how the collaboration from all of these areas works so beautifully together, that knowledge is king, right? We don't know what we don't know, and each of you have contributed to such great things to be aware of, that initially where you'd have to go to the Google and search it out, or if you're lucky enough to have somebody specifically on your team that's all they do, that's a huge luxury, but most of us don't have that. So you're our experts, so thank you for sharing that and bringing those things up. Now I want to switch gears slightly, and then we do have some questions. Opportunities, right? I mean, I'm always such an optimistic here, and I'm looking at the businesses, I'm looking at how everybody's pivoting right now, and you know, as we see, there's lots and lots of room for opportunity. So what are these opportunities in the field of cybersecurity? Like, should we get excited about this, do you think? You know, like, just let's talk about that, because I know I'm just saying that each and every one of you have said that you're addicted to cybersecurity. So obviously you have a passion for it. So let's generate some excitement. And if there's some listener out there going, what do I want to pivot to? Where can I utilize my experience to you know, do something new? Maybe this is it.
I'll go ahead. So when you think of, is there opportunity? We hear it all the time about this massive global talent shortage in cybersecurity. What I think we don't hear a lot about is, well, what does cybersecurity mean? And I think that is encompassing, in my mind anyway, everything from privacy, risk, governance, compliance. It could be technology, it could be on the business side, you could be an analyst, you could be a salesperson, you could work for a company that provides services, you could work for a company that's consuming services. There just is such a wide range of opportunities out there. So spending some time with individuals in the industry to gain insight into what their path was or what their journey was, I think is really important. And then the other thing is finding champions and people to support you in that call it a knowledge quest or journey that you're really looking to learn about other opportunities that are out there. So I think spending time doing things like job shadowing is a great idea. Finding out what skill sets are transferable. I've got two girlfriends, Dom and Venetia, know them well. One came from an HR background. She's now a security analyst, and another came from a banking background, and she's now essentially a CISO. So it's different career paths that have brought a lot of us to this profession, and understanding those transferable skill sets, I'd say, is the biggest opportunity.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
And I'll add to that to say it truly is a wide variety of skill sets. I've worked for organizations that have had the headcount dedicated to training and security awareness training and being a champion for the culture of security in the organization. And that's a skill set where you love to teach people, you love to, you know, talk to people, you want to share that excitement. It's very different from, you know, sitting at your desk and trying to find a software vulnerability. So there really is a huge variety. And if you're ever interested in cybersecurity, like Kim said, I encourage you to reach out to a panelist or someone that you might know in the industry and talk about what your strengths are and see where there's a fit.
Awesome. Thank you.
What I'll add to that as well is that, you know, I think it's really about trying to break down myths. You know, a lot of people think, you know, you have to have a background in in computer science, or you have to be in IT, or that you have to be a hacker, or that you have to be super smart. I'm living proof that you don't have to be super smart to be successful in the industry. So, you know, there's a lot of these myths that have gone on. At least I've seen over the past 15 years, especially in my career, in which, you know, when I speak to students or I speak to people who have expressed some interest in the industry, there's so many of these misperceptions. So I think where we can shatter those myths And like both Kim and Venetia were saying there, I mean, this is one of the best career fields to get into right now. You know, there's just so much opportunity, and there will be for at least the next 15 plus years, especially, you know, given the fact that, you know, we are truly going all in the virtual economy. You know, unless you're selling tacos out of the back of your mom's Volvo, you know, every organization is a digital organization. So with that comes the risk component. So, you know, there's going to be so many great opportunities across so many different levels. And cybersecurity as a whole is very much going to follow, and it is already following, sort of the same model as medicine. The field of medicine is super specialized. You know, like you have a general practitioner, but then you have all those specialties. You don't go to a podiatrist if you need a brain surgeon kind of thing. And I think that's what we're seeing emerge in cybersecurity, in which, you know, 15 plus years ago, it used to be a field ruled by generalists. Now it's very much a specialized area. So anyone can just zero in on an area that they're truly passionate about.
Amazing. Thank you.
I really have nothing to add. I think everyone really said it as it is. Just follow your passion and you will find a spot in this industry for you. Yeah.
Well, I would just like to say, as we're wrapping up here, we do have some questions. Before we go to the questions, you know, we did talk about, you know, how important it is to champion for the women in the organizations and in the industries, in your networks. So what are some, you know, for those that are listening, those that are in the room today, those that will be broadcasted later, how can men be champions for women? How can they support us more to break into these uncharted areas? What are some of your top ones? We'll do a quick round table.
Maybe I'll start off with that. I think what men can do a better job of is, first off, is making a more, I would say, a safer environment. I've seen with a lot of my clients and companies I've worked for, in which men are feel more compelled to say something because, generally speaking, their ideas don't get shot down. I've been in many organizations where if a female in the room says something, her thoughts are quickly marginalized. But if a male had said that exact same thing, then all of a sudden, you know, we're making a project out of it and running with it. So I think it's super important. And I think this would be my number one item, is for men to make sure that they level the playing field and make sure that the women on their team feel empowered and know that their ideas and the things that they're thinking about are just as valuable, if not more so, than any of their colleagues. So I think that's super important to be aware of that bias, even if it's an unconscious bias.
Amazing. Thank you, Dominic. And I do have to say, this did not happen today without you. So thank you again for being a champion for women and actually taking action. That's the other thing too. You have to take action. You can't just talk about it.
That's right.
So, consistency is key there. Would anybody else like to jump in?
Sure. So I think, and I don't want to say there's not a lot of men doing a lot of great things to empower women in their career. There are. So that's definitely happening. There are still a few of these unconscious bias and some situations that are happening that are not great examples. The biggest piece of advice I have for men is grow a set. Like, if you see something happening that is offside, speak up. Don't let it go.
That's it. Drop the microphone.
Yeah, end the webinar. It's over.
Throw the set. Throw the set. Love it. Sharon, anything to add?
I think it's important for men to, and I don't think this is new, but to identify the unique qualities that we can bring to the table. I mean, we bring the same qualities and some, and really look at the and some qualities that we bring and take advantage of what we have to offer, because it's so much more than, I mean, I don't want to put men down, but we have certain qualities that I don't think men will have, and take advantage of those. It really lets your company stand apart from others. It lets your employees stand apart from others. So take advantage of that. But, you know, us women also need to stand up for ourselves, although it's sometimes hard, and show them what we have as well, and not let, you know, what we think they think of us get in our way. I've always been of the mindset that I am different from men, but that is a good thing. I want to stand out from the 100 men in the room. I don't want to be like 100 other people in the room. I want to be different, and I'll show them how different I am, and that's a good thing.
Well said, Sharon. Any closing thoughts on this at all?
So many good points made already, but I would also say that when we talk about unconscious bias, it's addressing what we think a leader looks like, talks like, how they act. And I think that if, you know, as men and women, we both have unconscious bias, and we need to think about what does a leader really look like, what results really matter, and championing for those as well. We hear a lot about job descriptions that list years of experience and how women will not apply for jobs where they do not, you know, meet the maximum years of experience requested. We need to assess how we look for success factors and what we value. And when we find those people, encourage them to shine, which is exactly what happened to me. I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't have mentors saying, hey, you were really quiet in that meeting. You need to be louder next time. I know you had something to say. Let it out.
Very important. And I have to say that all of those things make perfect sense for us to encourage men to help support women. But I really love how women can also support women with those very same things. And because there are some unsupporters that you think are supporters that live in our worlds as well. So I think that it goes both ways. And, you know, I would just like to end by saying this was an exceptional panel. I could talk all day long. I have way more questions than we were able to get to today. So I think we'll have to have a part 2 if that's okay to you all. But I'd like to thank Kimberly and Sharon and Venetia and Dominic, you know, and to everybody that took out a time out of their day today to join us for the panel. And I will wrap this up today. I know that we're going to have to turn into the green room, but for those of you that are wanting to hear some answers to the questions, if the panel's okay for staying for just a couple more minutes, we'll answer those in the green room. But thank you all for joining. Of course, this is the Universal Women's Network virtual series. We thank you for your support, and we look forward to your comments. Please, please, please send me your comments on LinkedIn. We'd love to know what you thought of this panel. So please share your thoughts and your experience. So I'm going to turn this off. So thanks, everyone. I'm just going to press pause here on the recording.
The thing which again, this has been a real hot topic button item for me because maybe I have anger issues, I'm not sure. But one of the things which has really annoyed me is that how it's become, Zoom in particular became such a media lightning rod. And to me, it was for all the wrong reasons. And before we start vilifying certain platforms for not being secure enough, you know, as from a business perspective, the first thing before you even pick a platform is define your business and your security requirements. You know, so to me, when people were complaining about, oh, well, we're going with Zoom, but it's not secure enough, that to me is like a family buying a sedan and then bitching and complaining that it doesn't have 8 seats. Well, if you needed 8 seats, you need to put that as a requirement. So I think that's important that we all have that moment of pause and list your requirements first. And second of all, understand that any technology, any platform, none of them are 100% secure. Right. So, you know, and what really bugs me, and I was having a discussion with a lawyer about this, was he said that they prefer to use MS Teams because it's more secure. To which I said, well, secure against what? And he wasn't able to answer that, and that phone call ended quite abruptly, but that's beside the point. But what's really important, though, like I said, there is that we need to have these discussion and dialogue points and really figure out at the end of the day, what are you trying to secure against? If you have nuclear launch codes, yeah, probably shouldn't be using Zoom. But for most small and mid-sized businesses, again, just speaking from my purview, you know, Zoom has functionality that's unparalleled to any other of the other platforms. So I'll get off my soapbox. I'm done.
Yeah, that's 100% what I was going to say. It's not about if something is or is not secure and then vilifying it if it's not secure. It's more so about risk management. What are you trying to protect and what level of protection does that item need? So if we're having a chat about women in cybersecurity, or, you know, I'm going to hop off this call and jump on an all hands call where we get updates on the general business, no protected data in scope there. Zoom is a great tool, and security professionals, the worst thing we can do is be the no of the business and say, you can't use Zoom because it's not secure and I don't like it. that is a guaranteed way to get walked out the door and brought into somebody who has flexibility, who can understand the business needs and thus participate with the business.
I think it's also a lot about the procedures that you have in place and that you implement when you use these online platforms. So for example, make sure that you have passwords and that you're inviting and that you send out those passwords only to those who are supposed to be on the call. And then various settings on Zoom or any other platform in terms of locking it or making sure that everyone's in a waiting room before you let them in, amongst others. There are so many procedures that you can implement, but making sure that you identify what those are and that you train your staff so that they can implement it throughout. I mean, that will really enhance your security. Let's do that.
Perfect. Well, I think that's, I would like to add that I use Zoom all the time, but I do like the meeting rooms. I do like those extra measures of security. Very rarely do I post something because I'd like to know who's in the room, who's signing up for something. But I notice that Zoom is really actively, as they are experiencing, they're actually they're trying to keep up with it. So they're innovating as much as something is coming up. Oh, we didn't think about that. So I think that that's all great information, is that, you know, we invest into the companies that are willing to grow with that, and you don't know what you don't know. But as you do know, you make sure that you, as you know, you invest into doing something about it. So that is about all we have for questions. You know, I think that you guys had a great panel and lots and lots of great information to share, and it gives us everybody a lot to think about. So thank you for joining us.